Hi there, I'm Mrs. Irvin, and I am here today to take you to a special wetland called a vernal pool. A vernal pool is interesting because in the springtime it may be filled with shallow water. But then when you return later, the end of the summer in August, you will notice that it may have actually almost disappeared. There may not be any more water in it. It has completely dried up. You might have a vernal pool near your house, or maybe you've seen one when you've been out walking with your family. And you might have thought, what's happening in this pool? It doesn't look like there's much going on. What kinds of animals and plants do you think might live in or near a vernal pool? I've invited an expert, Catherine Fisher, to join us today, and she will bring us to a vernal pool and share what she knows. We'll actually begin this journey back in the end of the winter time so you can see what the pool looks like at that time.
I'm Catherine Fisher. I'm with the Lee Conservation Commission, and also for the last 33 years I've led nature walks with Massway students in the Lee Town Forest, which is just behind the Massway School. And one of the favorite places that we go to is this vernal pool. The town forest here has about a dozen of them, but this is the one that is the most active. This has the most critters coming to it throughout the year. Right now, it's frozen solid. There's a couple of chipmunks chasing each other on the far shore. But underneath here are the eggs and larvae of all kinds of critters: dragonflies, mayflies, caddisflies, eastern toe biters. There's all kinds of good stuff in here. Once this pool unfreezes, once it thaws, then the vertebrates will start to move in. Wood frogs, spotted salamanders, and frogs that aren't devoted to vernal pools like green frogs, bullfrogs, spring peepers. The thing that makes a vernal pool unique is that it has no water flow coming in and none leaving. There's no stream here. All the water in this pool comes from the sky. The vertebrates that use this pool come here to breed because a vernal pool eliminates a main predator of larvae and eggs of amphibians, and that is fish. Fish can't live in here because there's no way for them to get here. So critters that breed here don't have to worry about fish.
Fish don't live in the vernal pools, making it a safer place for amphibians such as frogs and salamanders to deposit their eggs. If there were fish there, they probably would try and eat those eggs, and so less would develop and grow. One of the reasons fish can't survive in a vernal pool is that it dries up almost every year, and as you know, fish need water to survive. More importantly, perhaps, is all the water in a vernal pool comes from the sky, the rain and snow that falls from the sky. It's not fed by streams or rivers that might bring fish. So this unique wetland does not have any fish.
Vernal pools are an important part of a forest ecosystem or a field ecosystem, but in the forest, they're especially important because they punch a hole in the forest canopy. Surrounding this pool, there's just a ring of trees, but in the middle, nothing. It lets the sun's energy pour into this little section of the forest. And as a result, you get plant species that you don't find elsewhere in the forest.
The vernal pool has enough water, it's deep enough to stop trees from growing in and right around it. So there's a big opening in the canopy. You can look up and see the sky. The sun is coming in and warming the pool with its energy. And so this can be an ideal place for amphibians to grow and develop.
During the breeding season, even though the frogs have eliminated fish, as I said earlier, there's a whole complement of animals that know that this breeding is taking place. So turtles from as far away as Wheelwright Pond, which is a mile and a half back here, will walk through the forest visiting vernal pool after vernal pool, feasting on frog eggs. They have to expend a lot of energy to get here. That's a long walk when you're only this big. But they do. They come through the forest, they visit the vernal pools, and it's worth the energy output because once they get there, they don't have to hunt. Eggs sit there in a nice pile for you and they just stuff themselves. It's their big protein feed of the year.
Have you ever been with your family and your parents had to pull over the car to stop and let a turtle cross the road? If you have, and if it was springtime, that turtle was probably headed for a vernal pool to get a nice big meal of frog eggs.
I've been here with kids and we've seen water snakes this big that have come to feed on the frogs. Ducks come here to forage. Herons come here to hunt for frogs. Otters come here to hunt for frogs. Mink do. Everybody knows that this is going to be the place where the amphibians congregate, and it becomes a food resource for a whole complement of vertebrates. The downside of choosing this kind of environment to have your youngsters grow up is that you don't have a lot of time. This pool, as soon as it warms up, will melt and then it starts to evaporate. On a really hot spring, it evaporates quickly. So time works against you when you're an amphibian breeding in this kind of habitat. You have to get here, have courtship, lay your eggs, then the parents leave, they go to the forest, and they're terrestrial frogs, so they spend their time, the rest of their life, on dry land. And then the young have to hatch, they have to develop, they have to metamorphose into adults, all within 2 to 3 months, sometimes less than that. Some rare years we get a year where it's so wet that this pool never evaporates, but that's very rare. So time is your big enemy in the vernal pool.
When it rains in the fall, the vernal pool fills with water. With the onset of cooler temperatures, the wood frog digs underneath the leaf litter, eventually freezing solid. In the spring, the warmer temperatures thaw the wood frog, and its heart begins beating again. It jumps into the pool, finds a mate, and they leave hundreds of fertilized eggs before returning to the forest. The eggs hatch into tadpoles, and then there is a race with time for the tadpoles to metamorphose into adult frogs before the pool dries up in the summer. They will return to continue the cycle next spring.
Those little critters, those little wood frogs, do not bury themselves deep in the soil. They're just a couple of inches underneath the leaf litter, so they freeze solid. During November, the beginning of November, the end of November, they hunker down just beneath the leaf litter, and then they slowly freeze. They have no heartbeat. They don't breathe. If you picked one up, it would be as hard as a rock. Its eyes would be all white, and it would look pretty much dead. But as soon as the temperature warms enough for the ice crystals inside them to thaw, they thaw out and they're ready to go. And as soon as they do thaw out and this pool unfreezes, they're in the pool.
Wow, can you believe that? Frogs freeze solid in the winter. And then when temperatures warm up in the springtime, they thaw out and can move around just like they did before they were frozen. We're going to return to the vernal pool now. A couple weeks later, the layer of ice and snow on the top of the pool has melted, so we can see what it looks like in the springtime.
So we're here 2 weeks later after our first visit, when the pool was covered with ice. Now the ice is gone, and 2 days ago the male wood frogs appeared in this pool and were quacking like crazy. When males congregate in a big group like this and put on a performance, that's called a lek, L-E-K. So these are lekking males, and they're calling and calling and calling and quacking and just trying to summon the females. That's one of the advantages of a lek, is that you get a big voice. You might only be 2 inches tall, but when 2 inches long, but when a whole big group of you start calling together, it makes a big sound that you can hear from quite a distance. And that lures the females to them. Now the frogs that are here along the borders are mostly male. They're the first ones here. The females are a little bit further back in the forest. They take a more leisurely approach. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There are fewer of them. It takes a male can reproduce when it's only 1 year old. The females need 2 years. And when you're a wood frog, everybody likes to eat you. Weasels, mink, fisher, herons, blue jays, snakes, other frogs, you're on everybody's menu. And so that extra year that the females need to mature gives them an extra year to be preyed upon, so that by the time everybody comes to the pool, the males outnumber the females 2 to 1. The females come down, they jump over the males because they don't want to get involved in a mass ball of frogs where sometimes the female actually drowns. So she jumps over them, and then she'll choose a mate. The males don't really battle each other. They engage in what looks like polite jousting. They just kind of like bump each other like little bumper cars and try to push each other out of the way. Once a female has selected her mate, the male will grab her underneath her front legs. He sits on top of her. He's smaller than her. She's the bigger frog. And then clasps his toes together and locks them. And that's called amplexus. When two frogs are in amplexus, you can't get them apart. He rides around on her. She selects a place to lay her eggs, and usually it's a place where other female frogs have laid their eggs, these little nurseries. And there's one right here. There's probably 10 or more egg masses in this little area, all attached to this branch right here. Each egg mass that the female frog lays, and she only lays one, has 200 to 1,000 eggs. And when the male grabs her, he can feel that she's gravid, that she's full of eggs. If she's not, he lets her go and tries to find someone who's still got her eggs inside her. She lays her eggs onto a branch or some kind of emergent growth that keeps the eggs close to the surface of the water, but still submerged so that the sun can warm them. I'm scooping up some wood frog eggs, and as you can see, they're very lumpy, and each little black embryo is covered with its own cell of jelly. This jelly gets warmed by the sun and keeps the egg toasty and helps it to develop fast. And stretching from about a yard ahead of me all the way down to near the edge of this pond here is just one large raft of these eggs. Each frog egg mass has about 200 to 1,000 eggs. They're much smaller when they leave the female's body. They're much more compact, and then they start to take on water and swell like a sponge. When you lay your eggs en masse like this, you provide protection for your young, because there's a chance somebody will eat someone else's eggs and not your own. But also there is a big stretch of solar collectors that help speed along the development of the embryos. As these eggs that are all together, this jelly that surrounds the embryo absorbs heat. It acts like a little greenhouse. And laying your eggs all together like this, and all the females choosing one area to lay their eggs, that absorbs even more heat. So that they're increasing the chances that their young will get time enough to hatch out quickly. As the eggs warm, a kind of beneficial algae grows on the top, and they'll start to turn greenish. It doesn't mean that they're rotten or anything, and it's actually good, because as the little tadpoles first hatch out, and they're only 1/4 inch long, that's their first meal. They graze on the algae that has grown on the eggs. After a while, they leave the eggs and they start to eat plant matter in the bottom of the pool, and they usually stay in groups. There have been some years where you can actually see this huge mass of just thousands and thousands of young tadpoles, blackening spots in the pool, and they actually follow the sun. As the sun hits different parts of the pool, that's where you'll find the tadpole. So the pool almost makes a tadpole clock. I've often wanted to, draw one up so I could tell what time of day it was by where the tadpoles were in this pool. You've got to develop fast in this pool, especially this year because the pool did not fill the way it usually does. So you have to develop fast because it's a race against time now. You've got to go from egg to tadpole, which takes about 3 to 6 weeks, and then from tadpole to adult, which takes usually another 2 months before this water disappears. And it's going to be a real race this year because this is not very deep. There aren't any frogs singing here right now, but probably tonight if you came here, you'd hear all the males quacking. The first frogs appeared on our planet about 270 million years ago. And since that time, there have been frog song on the planet every year since. It's the oldest vertebrate song on the planet, and when you hear it, then you're taking part in a 270 million year old continuum. So this is a cast of the earliest known frog fossil, about 245 million years old. Frogs have fewer vertebrae than most vertebrate animals, and they don't have ribs, or they have very reduced ribs. So you can see this guy only has a few little ribs here, and there are those kind of big back legs, and there you can just about see that froggy face. So that's the remains of the earliest known frog that was found in Madagascar. Amphibians arose out of a finned fish that kind of was able to leave the ocean and come up on the land, or leave the fresh water and come up on the land walking on its fins, and gradually that evolved into the first amphibian. It was an advantage to coming up on land and leaving your ancestral waters because the earth was full of insects, and nobody was there to catch them except other insects. There were no predators to catch you, to speak of. There might have been some giant dragonflies or something, but for the most part, you had the planet to yourself, the first amphibians. So they ruled the earth. They were the dominant vertebrate animal for 100 million years, and some grew to be as big as crocodiles. With their ancestors as fish, they retain some of those fishy characteristics. They have a slimy skin that was caused by mucus on the skin that helps to keep their skin moist, because if an amphibian dries out, it dies. It can't absorb water. Amphibians don't drink, they absorb water through their skin. Many of them breathe through their skin. So if their skin dries out, they're dead. Like fish, they have to lay their eggs in water, and they go through a metamorphic stage where they come out as tadpoles and have gills that they breathe through, just like fish, and then gradually change to adults, lose their gills, and most of them develop lungs, but a few of them are lungless and they breathe exclusively through their skin. So species that have to lay their eggs or always lay their eggs in vernal pools are called obligate species. They're also called indicator species. If you find a spotted salamander or a wood frog in a pool, or a fairy shrimp in a pool of water, the chances are very good that that pool of water is a vernal pool. We've already looked at the wood frog eggs. Spotted salamanders have already started to make their way to this pool too. They belong to a group of salamanders called mole salamanders. They spend almost all of their lives underground. They're beautifully colored, patent leather black with bright yellow spots. And when they come to the pools, they usually come at night, on a rainy night, which we've had. And right here is evidence that they've already been here. They're probably here underneath the leaf litter. These are spermatophores. The male salamanders leave these spermatophores full of sperm on leaf litter at the bottom of the pool, and then they try to encourage the females to pick up their spermatophore and insert it into her cloaca, where up above which are her eggs, to self-fertilize her eggs. He will do a little dance around her, kind of twining around her, trying to just nudge her and encourage her to pick up his spermatophore. After she does so, she'll lay a cluster of eggs, usually on a twig, and more underwater than the frog eggs that we saw. Frog eggs are real lumpy, like bubble tea or tapioca. Spotted salamander eggs have an extra layer of jelly over them, so they look almost a blue-white color, and they're very smooth and kind of otherworldly looking when they're under the water. Right now, this forest floor is crispy and dry, and if you're a critter that needs to stay wet, it's hard to migrate through this, to walk through all this dry leaf litter. So they're a little late. I'm expecting that the next really big rainy night, they'll come here en masse for what's called a big night, when just dozens and dozens or hundreds of salamanders will come to all the, each vernal pool. Some by the thousands, a big one. This isn't a particularly big pool, but it does have a good number of spotteds that come here to lay their eggs. As global warming disrupts our weather patterns, we'll have increasing periods of drought and dry springs and summer. There'll be years where some vernal pools won't fill at all, and the amphibians that migrate to that pool won't be able to breed. And the scenario is that shallow pools may disappear. Deeper pools will continue to function, but they'll be increasingly isolated, as will the amphibians that use them. Scientists are now talking about using vernal pools as indicator systems to track the progress of global warming on the planet.
I'd like to thank Mrs. Fisher for teaching us about vernal pools. This was wonderful to learn so much today. I hope this video inspires you to take a walk with your family and see if you have a vernal pool near your home somewhere. You might want to bring a sketchbook and write about what you wonder, what you are noticing in words and pictures and numbers. And you might even pick a topic to research a little bit more about. You could go to the library. One thing you might notice is that there aren't a lot of books about vernal pools. If you look for books about the forests or the ocean, you'll probably find quite a few books. So maybe this is a chance to write about vernal pools, or pick one part of a vernal pool and publish your own little book. That would be great to see. So share it with me if you do, and thanks so much for watching.